Hi, thanks. I'm Kirsten. I'm a lecturer here, actually. You mentioned at the beginning that you might give us some details. I really like the idea of the understanding the claims of the other, and you mentioned that you might give us some sort of maybe examples on the ground, or if there's anything that you could talk about, ways to do that. Exactly. You'd also sort of said, how is it that you deal, for example, with the terrorist, and you acknowledge that might be a little bit of a shocking suggestion, but I think that would be very interesting if you could say more about that.
Excellent, fine, thank you. I'll start off immediately. And I choose an example which is less controversial. No, it's as controversial, but which is less volatile than the terrorist. I've given you some ideas, but that's the end of the line of argumentation. Let's come closer to today's reality and talk about Iran. A typical example where we have failed, I think the West in general, I'm not pointing out any person or any country, where we have failed to consider the underlying core issues. The underlying core issues is the way of separating the front appearance to the underlying core issues. The front appearance is nuclear weapons, nuclear capacity. Nobody has ever asked why they jump in the 21st century, where we have had nuclear age in the 20th century, not in the 21st century. The weapons, I know, have remained, some of the problem has remained, but the crucial problems today are by no means nuclear. Look at Israel, look at Pakistan, look at India. We can peacefully live with nuclear weapons. There's no problem at all. The problem of nuclear weapons and nuclear capacities is, in my view, and here I open a parenthesis, I was participating in a nuclear planning group in NATO. Those that make the strategy and that decide on the strategy, including the use of nuclear weapons. So I was strongly impressed by the ability and the consequence of nuclear weapons. And nevertheless, I'm the one who tells you yesterday's problem. Today's problem are to solve the immediate problems that are facing us today in society, climate migration, drugs, some regional problems indeed, but not the nuclear in itself. Back to Iran. Why then, in the 21st century, do they jump on nuclear? Simple question is, it is the strongest symbol of identity. The strongest symbol of identity. What they search, what they still search and what they search from the beginning on, I dare say, my take, is the recognition. The recognition of as a country in the region, its importance, its history, its culture, its impact. It was, now I'm trying to interpret the Iranian position, it was neglected. It was not seen, they were not recognized in the way I'm not saying good or bad, I'm just trying to interpret. They were not recognized in their search for recognition. And therefore I thought, what's the strongest means of being recognized in the world? Nuclear weapon. Off we go. And they don't let loose. Why should they? They have not been recognized? No. With our sanctions, we jump on their bandwagon, trying to hit them, oil, other things, but never look at the real cause, possible real cause, of their search for identity and recognition. Now that's the bad side. What's the good side? Good side is engagement with Iran in its real, apart from the hypothetical, I would even say, though it certainly has some reality to it as well, I know. The more hypothetical search for recognition via nuclear power. The real problem is that status in their region, the problems they face, lots of problems of regional nature, migration, drugs, oil, indeed, maybe also. But there are plenty of problems in which to positively engage Iran Its regime, obviously the present regime. Don't start off by changing the regime. Engaging them in problems of common interest. Hasn't been tried. Yes, it has been tried once. Obama made a speech of engagement. But in my view, this policy, as correct, the engagement policy, the reaching out for engagement, has not been pursued persistently. It was quickly changed into sanctions. Okay, how did I get there? Well, the question was the other. In other words, looking into the other should have been done earlier, but now we are far into sanctions, indeed. Yeah? Nothing will happen, sanctions.
I'm Rachel. I'm just wondering, in the development of humanitarian law and ethics, how can diplomacy, are those within it, advocate for corporate diplomacy while at the same time advocating for reciprocity of interests and grievances? I see corporations as incapable of engaging the interests and grievances of others, especially if a forum for corporate diplomacy would only include corporate members, members of states or businesses. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I sense your concern. I hope I do. How can this work, corporate diplomacy? My thesis is the big transnational corporations need stability. Their best deals, their best business activities demand stability, a stable environment, and therefore they are interested in the stability, and they should promote this stability. Since they cannot do it alone, it should be a multi-stakeholder undertaking. Social responsibility by the companies only is not good enough. In any case, they are driven by the NGOs, they are driven, pressured by government at times, and the general public as well. It is a multi-stakeholder undertaking, but it is an undertaking necessary in the right direction. In this multi-stakeholder approach, they should be included because they into the transnational companies, have a genuine interest in this stability, so they should pay for it. I mean, pay in the terms of participate in it, not virtually paying in money terms, but being concerned about it. That's what I call corporate diplomacy. It's in its infancy, obviously. Corporate social responsibility is, with all its ups and downs, but it's not as antagonistic as you seem to feel, that it's all in the interest of government and they're not really interested in the other interest. They better be, because in as much as there is a peaceful environment around them and problems are solved, they profit from it as well. So they should actually be drawn into the solution of problems. Be it Nigeria, oil, discreditation of the environment, societies, and so on, or or India, child labor, or what have you.
Corporations represent capitalism, which requires the cheapest security. It requires the lowest costs as a bottom line, and that does not always represent the security of people and states.
True, but without security, there's no business. Surely they want to have it at the cheapest rate, I agree, but they need it. And if they can get it at the cheapest rate, fine. But if not, they have to pay up more, or their government, or the NGOs, or whoever. In other words, it's still the same. They are intricately linked to the notion of environmental stability. Environment, I mean the surroundings of their business, not only greenery.
Hello, my name's Paul. I guess my main question is, in all of this analysis, it seems to be kind of advice pointed to the foreign policy maker. And it seems like the problem of our times is that the formal foreign policy maker isn't really free to make foreign policy. To a certain extent, the diplomats of the world are constrained by preformed public opinion. And I would say the WikiLeaks example showed pretty clearly that the professionals, the US diplomats, had a very strong understanding of you need to think of the other people's shoes and think outside of the box. They're thinking outside the box, but unfortunately, domestically, politically, their solutions are untenable on the local domestic level. Taking the example of Iran, for example, the spirit in Congress, the Republican congressional opinion sort of forces, it's the tail wagging the dog, in that the professionals, the policy's already been decided by the political environment, and then they have to take it out. So what are your thoughts on how can the professionals, who in my opinion arguably are the ones most in touch with the need to think outside the box, how can they influence domestic or outside the box thinking to their domestic constituencies that allow the domestic second level of support that would allow these solutions to be implemented in the first place?
My simple answer would be there is an empowerment of the new generation of domestic policymakers, international policymakers, and of those that form the political environment. In other words, in all these positions, you should see yourself. What will I do in Congress? There's no anonymity to, this is not a ghostly being in Congress. Congress is made of, next Congress, the Congress thereafter, of you and me, or you more and the others. In other words, put yourself, and this is the message I'm trying to get through, put yourself into the need of the policymakers in different situations and positions in the future. And it's all up to you. There are no limits to it. There are limits today, I recognize, and I follow your assessment. Fine, no problem. But let me start go back to the beginning. The need is the change of mindset. And the change of mindset starts here, in this room, with you.
My name is Luis. One of the topics we talked about today is negotiation with terrorists. I had the opportunity to do that, negotiate with terrorists as a civil servant or state servant. But today I'm a diplomat. And when I did that, I think I did a terrible job because I pretty much let my feelings go into the negotiation table when I had in front of me people that last 2 days have murdered 15, 20 persons, and I knew that. And I knew what had happened 2 days before. I was sitting with these people negotiating peace. So you gave some elements regarding of how you diplomatically would negotiate terrorists. I didn't know how to do it 10 years ago as a civil servant, and today, even though I've been 4 years in this diplomatic corps, I still don't know if I would act differently, even though I know a little bit more about this diplomacy. So, since you have over 30 years of experience, I would like to know how would you negotiate with terrorists from a diplomatic point of view, in the sense that you gave some elements regarding how to negotiate with terrorists.
As I indicated, and I reiterate, is to find out their genuine grievances. Two things. Genuine grievances. Not only grievances, front grievances. Freedom of hostages, this, that, and the other. What is the underlying, mostly social concern that drives them into the position that they are in front of you as a terrorist with whom you are supposed to negotiate? What brings them into this situation? And it's a whole history of unfulfilled grievances, neglect, lack of identity, poverty. These are basically the needs that you will always find. Again, one of those cover-up stories is ethnicity and religion, a cover. fleeing into a format of symbolism, where the real notion and the real concern is disparity within the community, neglect, what have you, unfulfilled social needs, let's put it this way. In other words, to find out what the underlying social needs are. Not only can you start reading the mind of the person, why is he reacting the way he is, or why is he arguing in the way he is, but you can also analyze the surrounding field, the supporting field. But very often the tragedy of the action, the terrible character of the action is blinding us, the public, and the negotiators in doing so. It's human, but it's not very helpful. Yes?
My name is Brad. While I like your optimism as far as reconciling the other with, I guess, a state's domestic political values, the trouble I have is in the most difficult cases internationally, it doesn't seem to me that the other is something that just happens. It's actually a conscious political creation. Probably the best example is North Korea, which South Korea discovered in the failure of its sunshine policy for 15 years. So my question is, how do you engage regimes that not only thrive but depend for their very survival on the dialectic us versus the world? Okay,
Just about the same way. Look into their needs. Their needs, North Korea is certainly not having a bomb or military. No. Their need is the lack of recognition. You mentioned the North Korean, South Korean history. Look into the history. What created the state? What made the state go in the direction that they did? And find out how you can alleviate, how you can, first of all, recognize and accommodate, maybe in parts, I'm careful in my wording, partly accommodate their needs. Now, the lack of recognition, the lack of identity, the lack of positioning, geographic positioning or geopolitical positioning is already three factors which are playing out for North Korea as well, I think. What are the common interests within the neighborhood? Well, to be found out what concerns they regionally have and which they can be included in. It needs innovative thinking. Sorry to say I don't have solutions for all areas in all countries. I'm just giving you an approach which should work in all cases because the approach is similar. The search for the recognition of their specific grievances and the search for commonality of interests. This hasn't been done. Again, North Korea focusing on nuclear, no nuclear, off we go. Into sanctions or neglect, denial. We haven't even scratched the surface. Neither have I don't know about it. We have not even scratched the surface of their real needs. It's a structural approach that I suggest, without giving solutions in detail. Yes?
Going back to the question on corporations,
Yeah.
I think security is definitely in corporations' interests, but to a certain point. And then after that, a certain amount of domestic insecurity among parties and economic disparity or inequality is in corporations' interests because that also means low labor costs. So as kind of a foreign policy, how do you deal with that as a form of insecurity?
Indeed, there must be a fine line of commercial interest and outright insecurity or outburst of conflict due to these disparities. But you should start with, you can only push your greed, put it bluntly, your greed to the extent of avoiding social unrest. For you to find the conditions as a CEO of a company to give enough social improvements that social unrest is avoided. And still your profits are manageable. But it's not one or the other. It's not all one. It's not all greed. Then you're really moving into social strife, and that can't be the solution. To be more precise in what I expect of transnational companies, there is in social ethnic strife, let's say, not only social strife of the workers, but ethnic strife locally, Nigeria context. It's the business intelligence. They have a great network due to their workers, due to their customers, which can be made use of. They have a risk and conflict impact assessment. They have it for their own interests, for their business interest. How much can we invest here? What's the market? And so on. Fine. And they also have a certain obligation, I think, in the direct or indirect participation in conflict handling. According to the political will of this company, the means, the size, the pressure, and so on. There are variables. For once, I agree with variables. It's not all the same for all companies in all countries at all times, but it should be thought through in their interest.
I've got a couple of questions. One actually goes back partly to what we were discussing this morning. My first question is, I'd like you to make an observation. It goes partly back to what Luis was saying around emotion. And it's involving a question that is of concern, obviously, to many of us, which is the specificity of the political.
The
specificity of the political.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With regard to the diplomatic and the legal normative. And let me take a very obvious example, and I'd like your response. How did you think about it? How would you think about it? How can this be a way of thinking for the future or not? My example is 9/11. Now, with the downing of the Twin Towers and with the attack on the Pentagon, quite clearly very symbolic sites of the United States were taken out. Whatever one thought about the reaction of George W. Bush and the beginning of a self-defense strategy that then clearly ultimately escalated into 10 years of gradual American delegitimation, there was an intensity of emotion. Clearly was very carefully instrumentalized by neoconservative foreign policy. But there was an intensity of emotion that precisely is the political. The political is the moment when our identities are put in question or are traumatized collectively. And at that moment, that political decision in response is very difficult. And it is very easy to respond in a reactive rather than proactive manner. So that in some ways, I'm not sure, for example, the Democrats really would have reacted that differently from the way in which a neoconservative foreign policy administration did at that point, because the question was, the political was the intensification of emotion at that moment. Now, you are an international lawyer and you're a diplomat. The whole question we obviously then had after that was that the American administration was flouting international law, was going against international norms, ultimately undermining the international community. But what was lost in that whole debate, and which I'd like to return to now and hear from you, is, yes, but it was an incredibly political moment, and a moment that became, sadly, a symmetry between violence from the American side and violence from the enemy side, and clearly both sides were wrong, and it escalated violence. How does your position with regard to 9/11, how does it try and rethink that moment of extraordinary symbolic and emotional intensity? That's my first question. My second one, I'll be much briefer, but I think it's structural with regards to some of the things, the ways in which you're responding. and I'd love to hear you more about it. You spoke at a moment about the responsibility of the media, and you said the media will be drawn into further responsibility, a bit like you said to Rachel, who I don't think is here anymore. That, yeah, in a sense, business, international business, if it wants a calm environment, it's going to necessarily have to be more responsible to global issues which are ethical, so that the profit motive of capitalism necessarily interiorizes ethical motivation. I like that argument. I think it's subtle and it makes a great deal of explanatory sense. But tell me, please, more. I understand it for business, because business people do want a peaceful environment, apart from, as you said, the arms trade. But tell me more about how the media are going to necessarily be drawn into responsibility in the coming decades in such a way that they will put the other before the I. So those are my two questions.
Thank you very much. My answer in one sentence to the first is, you gave us the example of a manipulative persuasion of the public in order to gain political support. It worked. Not for long, but it worked at the time. And it's a negative example. I wonder if it still can happen again. The public is much more alert, much more critical, and the public is wider in its actions. There is more public than there was in 9/11 and shortly thereafter. Which leads me to the answer to the second point, the media, the responsibility of the media. The media is becoming, is getting competitors. The traditional media is getting competitors in the internet, in all its activities, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. And this competition, I think, can be very healthy. So much so that the media, the general media, will be criticized, CNN, BBC, if they don't fulfill these demands and requirements which the general public will bring to them more and more. They will be put into competition by others. They will be criticized, and they somehow will lose their field of attendance and their public. An example, if Fox News is not accepted by the general public, it will run out of business. Right side news empire. This could be done by similar competitive empires, and it could be done by the internet at large. So there are means of correcting the media into this sense of responsibility. And therefore, I dare say the responsibility will not only work for transnational companies, but it will catch on to the media. And the diversity of media already indicates that there's more and more competition in the market.
Hi, thank you. My name is Lee. I would just like to know if you feel that evidently we understand that there are these concerns in the world today. Do you feel that the culture of education is answering these concerns, especially for those of us who are close to graduating, or, for example, as myself, beginning our university studies? Do you think that they're doing their job? Do you have recommendations for them?
I have full faith that the American University of Paris is preparing you well in a cultural, educational direction. It is up to you individually to choose your source of information and to formulate your mind accordingly. Today you're swamped with information. It's not a matter of what information you get and how much you can get, but what orientation you apply to the information. It's not a matter of this school or any other school. It's a matter of you. Don't point the finger to others. Point the finger to yourself. Your choice. On what value structure do you assess the information, and what orientation do you apply to the information? Your personal values applied to situations. What this institute, as many other institutes provide, is the opportunity to find your way, and I trust that they fully are on the right way. I just put a grain of salt into it by giving you some more provocative thoughts and advance on that one. But you should feel confident in the way you have been directed.
I guess kind of relating back to the question I asked, since I am envisioning myself trying to work in UN foreign policy as a diplomat.
Right.
You talked about patience and creative thinking outside the box. Could you give me your thoughts a little bit on how do you define success? And in a situation where a formal diplomat's political situation may be so constrained that an ultimate solution to a problem is not possible, how do you define success in negotiations so that some small measure of progress is what you're shooting for, as opposed to if you base your negotiations on solving everything, it's impossible, as opposed to taking a gradual approach. So patience, I guess.
Simply put, the success in any negotiation is the general acceptance of a new status quo. The general acceptance of the new status quo, which means it must be so interesting, so advantageous to all concerned that it provides a sustainable solution. Let me define sustainable. Certainly not ultimate, not everlasting. Sustainable. For the time given in the prevailing circumstances. Nothing is eternal. Ideas are, but not solutions to problems. Thank you.